What if I told you that the beloved children's stories about a honey-loving bear named Winnie the Pooh were born from one of the most tragic periods in human history? That behind every cheerful adventure in the 100-Acre Wood lies a hidden connection to the trenches of World War I, personal trauma, and a father's desperate attempt to heal his son's wounded mind. Today, we're diving deep into the dark secret that Disney never wants you to know about Winnie the Pooh. And trust me, once you learn this truth, you'll never look at Christopher Robin the same way again. The story most people know goes like this. A. Milne created charming stories about his son Christopher Robin and his stuffed animals, bringing joy to millions of children worldwide. But what they don't tell you is that these stories weren't just innocent children's tales. They were a father's frantic attempt to save his son from the psychological scars left by one of the darkest chapters in human history. Let me take you back to 1914, when Alan Alexander Milne was just another young writer trying to make his mark on the world. He was working at Punch magazine, writing satirical pieces and enjoying the carefree life of a literary gentleman in London. But then the Great War erupted, and everything changed. Like millions of other young men, Milne enlisted, convinced he'd be home by Christmas. He had no idea he was walking into a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Milne served as a communications officer with the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, and what he witnessed in the trenches of the Somme was beyond anything the human mind was designed to process. Picture this: men blown apart by artillery shells, poison gas drifting across no man's land, the constant thunder of guns that never seemed to stop, bodies piled in trenches, friends dying in agony, and the overwhelming stench of death that clung to everything. This wasn't the glorious war the recruitment posters had promised. This was hell on earth. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. During the Battle of the Somme in 1916, Milne contracted trench fever, a debilitating disease spread by body lice that was rampant in the unsanitary conditions of the Western Front. While recovering, he suffered what we now recognize as severe shell shock, what modern medicine calls post-traumatic stress disorder. Night terrors, uncontrollable shaking, an inability to concentrate, and flashbacks that would transport him right back to the mud and blood of the trenches. The cheerful, witty writer who had left for war was gone, replaced by a broken man struggling to function in civilian life. When Milne returned to London in 1916, he tried to resume his normal life, but nothing was normal anymore. His wife Daphne noticed the changes immediately. He would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, reliving the horrors he'd witnessed. Loud noises would send him into panic attacks. He couldn't write the humorous pieces that had made his reputation because laughter seemed impossible when his mind was still trapped in those hellish trenches. Then, in 1920, something happened that would change everything. Christopher Robin Milne was born. For the first time since the war, A. Milne felt a glimmer of hope. Here was innocence personified, a blank slate untouched by the horrors he had witnessed. But as Christopher grew, Milne became obsessed with protecting his son from the darkness that had consumed his own life. And this obsession would drive him to create one of the most beloved fictional worlds in literature, but for reasons far more desperate than anyone realized. The 100-Acre Wood wasn't just a charming setting for children's stories. It was A. Milne's attempt to create a perfect world where war didn't exist, where problems could be solved with friendship and honey, where innocence could be preserved forever. Every character in that magical forest represented something Milne had lost in the war. Pooh's simple contentment was the peace of mind he desperately sought. Piglet's nervous energy reflected his own anxiety, but in a manageable, almost endearing form. Eeyore's depression was his own darkness, but transformed into something that could be comforted and understood. But here's the truly disturbing part of this story. Milne didn't just want to create innocent entertainment for his son. He was trying to use these stories as a form of psychological armor, wrapping Christopher Robin in a cocoon of artificial childhood that would protect him from ever experiencing the kind of trauma that had shattered his father's mind. The real Christopher Robin became a prisoner of his father's war trauma, forced to live up to an impossible image of eternal innocence. Think about it. In the Pooh stories, Christopher Robin is portrayed as wise beyond his years, the benevolent ruler of the 100-acre wood who solves everyone's problems with gentle wisdom. But this wasn't just creative storytelling. Milne was projecting onto his son the role of the healer he desperately needed for himself. Christopher Robin wasn't just a character in these stories. He was his father's therapist, his salvation, his last hope for finding meaning after the meaninglessness of war. The success of the Pooh books brought worldwide fame, but it also trapped the real Christopher Robin in ways that would damage him for life. Imagine being a child and having your private world with your stuffed animals turned into public property. Every interaction with your father becomes material for the next book. Your childhood toys become characters that millions of people feel they own. Your very identity becomes inseparable from a fictional version of yourself that your traumatized father created as therapy. As Christopher Robin grew older, the weight of his father's expectations and the public's demands became unbearable. He was supposed to remain forever young, forever innocent, forever the wise child who could solve everyone's problems. But real children grow up. They become moody teenagers. They rebel against their parents. They make mistakes. Christopher Robin wasn't allowed to do any of these normal things because it would shatter the perfect world his father had created to cope with his war trauma. The relationship between father and son deteriorated as Christopher entered adolescence. Milne couldn't understand why his son was changing, why he was becoming angry and resentful. The perfect child from the stories was supposed to stay perfect forever. But Christopher Robin was becoming a young man, and young men reminded Milne too much of the boys he'd watched die in France. The very sight of his son growing up triggered memories of all those young soldiers who never got the chance to reach adulthood. Here's where the story becomes even more tragic. Christopher Robin eventually went to boarding school, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. But even there, he couldn't escape the shadow of Pooh. Classmates would tease him mercilessly, calling him by his fictional name, expecting him to be the perpetually cheerful character from the books. He was bullied relentlessly, not just for being associated with children's stories, but for being the symbol of an innocence that his peers found embarrassing and fake. The irony is devastating. O.A. Milne had created the Pooh stories to protect his son from trauma, but in doing so, he inflicted a different kind of trauma. Christopher Robin grew up feeling like he was living in his father's fantasy, unable to develop his own identity separate from the character who shared his name. He felt responsible for his father's mental health, carrying the impossible burden of being someone else's emotional salvation. When World War II began, Christopher Robin enlisted in the military, partly as an act of rebellion against his father's attempts to preserve his innocence. Milne was horrified. Here was history repeating itself, his beloved son marching off to face the same horrors that had broken his own mind. The very thing he had tried to prevent through the creation of the 100-acre wood was happening anyway. Christopher Robin survived the war, but the relationship with his father never fully recovered. In interviews later in life, Christopher spoke about feeling like he had been robbed of a normal childhood. that his father's war trauma had overshadowed his entire upbringing. The stories that brought joy to millions of children had been a source of pain and confusion for the real boy who inspired them. But the dark secret goes even deeper than family dysfunction. The Pooh stories, when viewed through the lens of Milne's war experience, reveal disturbing undercurrents that most readers never notice. The 100-Acre Wood is completely isolated from the outside world, just like Milne wished he could isolate his son from reality. There are no other humans in this world except Christopher Robin, reflecting Milne's desire to keep his son away from other people who might contaminate his innocence. Notice how conflict is handled in the Pooh stories. Problems are always gentle misunderstandings that can be resolved through kindness and patience. This isn't just good storytelling for children. It's wish fulfillment from a man who had witnessed conflicts that could only be resolved through violence and death. In Milne's fantasy world, there are no real enemies, no genuine threats, no problems that can't be solved with a bit of thinking and a lot of honey. Even the characters' flaws are presented as endearing quirks rather than serious problems. Eeyore's depression is treated as amusing pessimism rather than a serious mental health issue. Piglet's anxiety is portrayed as cute nervousness rather than debilitating fear. This reflects Milne's own relationship with his war trauma. He couldn't make it disappear, but he could transform it into something manageable, something that could be comforted and understood rather than feared and avoided. The obsession with routine and ritual in the Pooh stories also reflects trauma responses. Characters have their special places, their preferred activities, their comfortable patterns. This mirrors the way trauma survivors often cling to routine as a way of maintaining control in a world that has proven to be chaotic and dangerous. The 100-Acre Wood operates according to predictable rules, unlike the random violence and senseless destruction Milne had witnessed in the war. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the way time works in the 100-Acre Wood. It's always the same season, always the same comfortable afternoon. The characters never age, never change, never face the passage of time that brings loss and death. This reflects Milne's desperate wish to freeze his son in childhood forever, to prevent him from growing into the kind of young man who gets sent off to die in wars. The real tragedy is that Milne's attempt to create a perfect world for his son backfired completely. Instead of protecting Christopher Robin from trauma, it created a different kind of psychological prison. The boy grew up feeling responsible for maintaining his father's fragile mental state, unable to express normal childhood emotions like anger or sadness because they might shatter the perfect image his father needed to maintain. As Christopher Robin reached adulthood, he struggled with his own identity issues. Who was he beyond the character in his father's stories? How could he form relationships when people saw him as a symbol rather than a real person? How could he pursue his own dreams when he was forever tied to a fictional version of himself that represented his father's psychological needs rather than his own authentic self? The publishing success of the Pooh books made everything worse. The more popular the stories became, the more trapped Christopher Robin felt. Millions of people around the world had fallen in love with their version of him, a version that bore little resemblance to the real person he was becoming. He couldn't disappoint all those fans by growing up, by becoming complex and flawed and human. When A. A. Milne died in 1956, Christopher Robin felt both grief and relief. Finally, he might be able to step out from the shadow of his fictional self. But it was too late. The damage had been done. He had spent his entire childhood and young adulthood being someone else's therapeutic fantasy, and he never fully recovered his own sense of self. The cruel irony is that the Pooh stories did help millions of children around the world. They provided comfort, imagination, and joy to countless young readers. But for the real boy who inspired them, they were a burden too heavy to bear. He had been sacrificed on the altar of his father's trauma, turned into a fictional character to serve someone else's psychological needs. This is the dark secret that Disney and the Pooh corporate empire will never acknowledge. The stories that have generated billions of dollars in revenue were born from a father's desperate attempt to cope with war trauma by using his son as an emotional crutch. The cheerful world of the 100-Acre Wood was built on a foundation of psychological damage that rippled through generations. Christopher Robin Milne eventually wrote his own books, including memoirs that revealed the complicated truth about his childhood. He tried to reclaim his own narrative, to separate his real identity from the fictional character who had overshadowed his entire life. But even his attempts to tell his own story were often dismissed by fans who preferred the innocent version they had grown up with. The lesson here isn't that we should stop enjoying Winnie the Pooh stories. They remain beautiful works of children's literature that have brought genuine joy to millions of readers. But we should understand the human cost of that creation, the real family that was damaged in the process of creating this fictional perfect family. Today, we have a better understanding of trauma and its effects on families. We know that well-meaning parents can sometimes pass their own psychological wounds to their children in unexpected ways. We understand that trying to protect children from all of life's difficulties can sometimes be more harmful than helpful. And we recognize that turning children into symbols or therapeutic objects, even with the best intentions, can be a form of abuse. The story of Winnie the Pooh reminds us that behind every beloved creation lies a human story, often more complex and painful than we want to acknowledge. A. Milne wasn't a villain. He was a traumatized veteran trying to heal himself and protect his son using the only tools he knew how to use: words and imagination. But good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes, and the real Christopher Robin paid the price for his father's attempt to create a perfect world. So the next time you read a Pooh story or watch a Disney adaptation, remember the real boy who inspired it all. Remember that behind the honey and the happy endings lies a story about trauma, family dysfunction, and the complicated ways we try to protect the people we love. The 100-Acre Wood may be a place of eternal childhood and simple solutions, but it was created by people living in a world where childhood ends and problems don't always have easy answers. That's the dark secret of Winnie the Pooh, a secret that reveals as much about human nature as it does about the price of creating art from pain.